Hi, my name is Jeremy, and on this channel I talk about color and light. I have been a lighting director, a lighting artist, a cinematographer, a director of photography, and so I think a lot about light and color. And I was working on a project a few years back where I was doing some studies, and I was looking at a whole bunch of different films and games focused around action films and action games and how to increase the quality of our cinematography on this project. And I stumbled across something that I found really fascinating. I think it really came down to seeing the Mission Impossible films and the James Bond films and looking at them from the 1960s all the way up to present day, especially with James Bond, or Mission Impossible from the 1990s to present day, and I noticed this striking thing, and I just wanted to share it with you all because I think it's so fascinating. So here are some of the images that I looked at. I looked at Indiana Jones, I looked at Goonies, I looked at James Bond films, Mission Impossible films, and I started to notice something was different between the old films and the new films. Looked at even really old films, North by Northwest versus modern Skyfall, James Bond, or Mission Impossible, old James Bond versus new James Bond. And I started to notice this thing. Can you see it? Isn't it cool? Did you notice this big shift that happens? Okay, if you didn't, let's go back a little bit and I'll talk about this again. I need to rewind and say, how did film start? Theater has been around for thousands of years. We have told stories. You can find old Greek amphitheaters where they would do plays in front of hundreds or thousands of people. It wasn't until 1906 when the very first feature film was shot. And here's an image from it, The Story of the Kelly Gang from 1906. So it was pretty early. The technology at the time was very limited. The amount of light needed to capture film frames at 1/24th or 1/48th of a second needed a tremendous amount of light. So the only way to shoot these was outdoors in sunlight. Sunlight was the only light that was bright enough to be able to shoot this. Also, throughout thousands of years of history, people had done plays in theater, and so they built the sets for this very much like a stage for theater. And this was the beginning of feature film. Translate a little bit further, technology changes really quickly, and 1920s, you can see this look that looks very theatrical, and they realize in order to see the characters, you need to see their faces and you need to be able to separate them from the background. So there's rim lights put from behind to help make these characters really stand out. The nice bright light, the contrast of light and dark. And this follows a lot of theatrical methods that we use today. For the past 100 years, since electric lights in theaters has been pretty consistent with the way things can be lit. And this blended into cinema. So early Charlie Chaplin can see the characters' faces in those rim lights just like they would do on stage. But the advantage of film is that you can get much closer to the characters and see much more subtlety in their performances. Here's some images from Casablanca and looking at the style of the light from these old films. Very beautifully done, but there is a style that came out. Here's Gone with the Wind in 1939 and The Wizard of Oz, 1939, the same year. Color film was a brand new thing and it changed the game. From black and white, it was just value-based thinking, and now there's color. What do we do with color? The story that I've heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, is that Technicolor really wanted to show off color film. It was a pretty amazing thing to go in and watch a movie that starts black and white, and then all of a sudden the screen turns to color. It was something brand new that people hadn't seen before, and it was just amazing. So one of the things that they did was they had a very strict standard. In order to get the brightest colors on film, they used all white light sources. And I can look at this as a cinematographer and notice that all of the light is just pure white, and I can see all the little reflections, and I can see these multiple overlapping shadows because the light had to come direct from the light sources onto the characters in the sets to be able to see everything and for it to expose right. But it started to make a cultural look to cinema that stuck for a very long time. If I look at these images from The Wizard of Oz, notice the characters are lit by bright white light from the front, direct from the light sources. Really hard shadows on their faces, but placed just enough that you can really see their faces and don't have any terrible shadows across them, but it is a certain look. And then they have rim lights from behind to separate them from the background. But through the film, the characters look very consistent when they're first meeting each other, to when they're having their big moment in the castle, to the happy ending. The characters' skin tones and all of the colors look pretty much the same through the whole film. And this continued beyond the 1930s. Here's the 1952, Singin' in the Rain. This same type of look of white light sources. North by Northwest, 1959. I start seeing like this look to all of these images. Even though the characters are in a car, it's almost this theatrical look. Their skin tones are the same. Look, night, day in the car, their skin tones, they look identical. They just, it's all the same through the whole film. Even when they're outdoors, there are lights that are put onto the characters' faces to give them a very consistent look and a consistent skin tone through the whole movie. 1961, Breakfast at Tiffany's. The same thing continues on, and the look of television and the look of film evolved in a certain way. This is the way you light characters' faces. This is the way you light women, the way you light men, the way you light backgrounds, the way you light interiors. It had a very consistent look. 1962, Lawrence of Arabia. 1964, Mary Poppins. Notice that the characters are all lit very consistently through the film. Even when you have scenes that are outdoor in the blue of night, there's still light that's pretty much white light from the front. The Sound of Music, 1965. Very consistent skin tones and lighting through almost the entire film. This kind of front white light. 1979, first Star Trek movie. The same thing. 1980s, Ghostbusters. It's the same thing throughout most of the film. Now, there are exceptions. There absolutely are exceptions. There are parts of this film that have a lot of color and a lot of difference. But overall, most of the characters are lit to see the characters. It is a very character-centric method of lighting, and it makes sense. Indiana Jones. I think Indiana Jones was the movie that made me go, there is something here, when I noticed studying the light sources, like, where are these lights coming from? What is this in this scene? They're just like, there's a hard light over here and a hard shadow and overlapping shadows and rim lights from the back. Indiana's down in this cave and there's suddenly white light on his face and white rim light on his back coming from where? There's no sunlight in here. It's all direct and sharp shadows. And like, where is this coming from? This lamp here this torch that someone was carrying would be warm light, but on his back, it is hard white light with hard shadows. And there was definitely another light off screen lighting onto Harrison Ford in this scene. Here, just so many white light sources. And there's some variance of color through this, but wow, I just really started to see this theme. The Goonies has a lot of scenes that are lit. White light from the front, hard light direct from the light source. White light from the front. Besides Indiana Jones, it was also the James Bond movies where I look at Pierce Brosnan as James Bond pretty much through the whole film looks the same. He's very consistent. It gives him a very elegant look so that he always looks good on camera. Mission Impossible, 1996. So we've gone from the 1930s all the way through the 1990s with this very consistent cinematic language of light that has this same white light look with lots of rim lights that are off screen that we don't know where they are, just like you would do on a theatrical stage. Something up above you is lighting you. It wasn't until I was capturing images from Mission Impossible 1 and then capturing images from Mission Impossible Fallout that was 20 years later that I started to go, whoa, something changed. There is a big difference here in the look of these scenes. There's no white light from the front. There's color from the environments that's bleeding onto the characters. The characters are not consistent from shot to shot. Look at how radically different this shot is. Here's the big difference. Here is the shift, as I like to call it. I think sometime in the 1990s, early 2000s, cinematographers changed from character-centric lighting to environment-centric lighting. Another way to put this would be theatrical to natural lighting. Part of this comes down to the technology itself. We learned that all these overlapping hard shadows like we saw in the images of The Wizard of Oz, and just gives this kind of overlapping direct light source look, versus if you diffuse those lights a little bit, you change the quality of the shadows and of the light, it gives a softer look and everything can blend together. Small little light sources versus large light sources that just smooth out those shadows, gives a creamier look. And this is what I think changed. Part of this was technical, part of this was cultural. Two things that held that look for such a long period of time until it shifted. The technical was we suddenly got digital cameras. We got post-grading that we could do digitally and really make cameras far more sensitive to low light situations. We also had lights that didn't have to be so hot. We could do a lot more. And culturally, there were people who were disruptors who would be like, do we have to do it this exact way? Is there another way we could do it? And then, of course, I like to notice the difference between direct light sources, primary light sources, where the light is coming straight from a light right onto the character's face, versus a change of using secondary and indirect light from the environment, natural light that bounces in the scene, and using that to shape and to develop the characters. So let's look at some more Mission Impossible with these in mind. The character is lit from lights in the environment, and now he doesn't have hard shadows. He doesn't have white light onto his face. It's very soft light. It's indirect light. Now when I see scenes in cars, it looks like he's actually in a car and not on some theatrical stage. This scene in particular I think is really beautiful, where they're not out in the sun. All of their light, when I cut into the close-ups, is bouncing off the wall back there and onto their faces, which makes a very soft quality to the light here. It changes the shadow quality because the light source is very large. It's not just one little dot of sun way up in the sky. It's this huge wall that's wrapping the light around their faces. Same with here. This scene is lit from bounce light. It's all indirect light from what's happening off screen. Just out here, there's sunlight and it's bouncing off of a large section of ground and up onto the characters. That's our key light now. You still get the shape of the character and the light wrapping around their face, but it's indirect light, so it gives a different quality. And now we're freed from having to follow that cultural standard of this is the way you light a woman's face and a man's face and the way you light environments with all these white light sources. Now we can have so much more range of emotion because we can make these really dark scenes and really bright scenes and a lot of different color. Skyfall, great example. Look, remember when I showed the images of James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, pretty much looking same through the whole film? Well, check out Daniel Craig here and the variety just in this one film of Skyfall and the different looks that he has from this environment-centric lighting and the way he's lit by bounce light here and warm light, cool light, green light, all kinds of different colored light. And it allows the film to have a much bigger dynamic range of emotion as the character's moving through these different worlds. We don't have to see the whole character's face anymore. We can just have a little sliver of light. We know who it is. We know what the storytelling is. We've evolved quite a bit to where we can have the character's face not even be lit at all and it's just a silhouette. And it makes for some really beautiful imagery in film. Blade Runner 2049, I just love the look of this film. I've referenced it before in other videos, but look how graphic it is and how strong of a difference this is from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom to what was done on Harrison Ford in this, where it's all indirect, soft, beautiful light. And they're okay with letting the characters' faces not have pure, correct colored skin tones. They can be very indirect light and a lot of silhouette. Or when they do get exteriors, they don't always have to have sun and rim lights. It can be with very soft, beautiful light sources. So to wrap this up, this is just something that I observe and I find really fascinating, that we go from Mary Poppins in the 1960s to Mary Poppins Returns in 2018, and just look at the difference between these. If I just this is the kids in Mary Poppins and this is the kids in Mary Poppins. It feels so much more rich and believable and soft and magical. And I think that this is what cinema needs, is to be able to know when to break the rules and say, hey, do we have to do it that same way? Why don't we try something different? Maybe there's more stories that we can tell if we break the way of doing things traditionally, and we can look and use all of the tools of the beauty of light and break all these rules and just make awesomeness. All right, that's my thoughts for the week. I hope you enjoyed this as much as me. I just think this stuff is so cool, and I just want to share it with everyone and give you the same love of light that I have. All right, until next time, keep creating. Bye.